All right, good morning. If you are a seller who's been hoping for some rate cuts, I have some bad news for you today. One day I will have good news for you. That day is not today because Canada's inflation rate held. And as a result, RBC is now calling for no more rate cuts. They're actually calling for the rate cutting cycle to be completely over. And I have some thoughts of this. I have some thoughts of my own on this topic. So Canadian inflation is cooling, but remains hot enough to stop further rate cuts. StatsCan data shows the headline consumer price index stalled in May. That would typically be good news if not for rising risk that inflation could accelerate again. In response, RBC believes the central bank's easing cycle is over and further easing would have to be justified by a weaker economy and clearer signs of deceleration, which I will also talk about. The year-over-year reading continued to be distorted by the carbon tax removal, which I am not convinced. I don't know if you guys noticed this. I noticed this. I noticed going into the removal of the carbon tax, gas prices fell a ton. And then right before they were going to remove the carbon tax, gas prices rose. I remember gas prices came down to like 143 in Abbotsford, maybe even a bit less. And then they rose all the way back up to like 160 something. And then after the carbon tax got removed, they came back down. So I don't know how that happens, but regardless, they're saying it was distorted by the carbon tax removal, which is still lowering the after-tax price of consumer energy products from a year ago. CPI excluding energy was 2.7% in May, which is slightly lower than the 2.9% we saw in April, which is a slight improvement, but still 0.7 points higher than the Bank of Canada's target rate and only 0.3 points below its upper band of tolerance. This gentleman further notes that nearly half of CPI components saw prices grow more than 3% target in May. So half of the things in the CPI are still growing at more than 3%, while the other half is, I guess, below that. That's better than the start of the year, but still a step back from April. So we were worse at the start of the year, but getting worse than April, basically. May's core CPI was 3% higher than last year, down from the 3.4% reported in April, considering the central bank's upper bound of tolerance. The BOC is more than likely going to wait for a persistent reduction below the threshold before celebrating. So it's like, a very common discussion that I've had with sellers over the last 2 years is, we'll wait for the rate decision, right? I don't know. It's a very interesting thought. Like a lot of people think that prices will instantly go up after a rate cut, which is not the case. And in my opinion, we probably need at least 2 rate cuts before it actually makes a difference, because variable rate mortgages I think they're slightly higher than fixed, not by very much. Like they're almost the same now, but most people are still going fixed. They're still going like 3-year fixed at the moment. So you probably need 2 more rate cuts for it to really make a difference on the monthly payment, as well as the stress test and what you can qualify for, right? CPI has been distorted by the consumer carbon tax obfuscating. What the hell does that mean? Hold on here. Obfuscate. Render obscure, unclear, or unintelligible. Okay. Learn something new every day. Obfuscating some of the price growth observed by RBC. Rising geopolitical risk and the trade war are both expected to boost the cost of living, while the impact has yet to become material. It's sure to be a lingering concern for the BOC. So I'm not an economist. I'm a Fraser Valley realtor. I could completely be wrong about everything that I say on this channel. Something I don't understand is they're worried about the impacts of the trade war, but that's not actual inflation, right? Like, inflation is a rate of change. It's not the prices. It's how fast are they going up. And if you put a tariff on something, the price of that goes up once. And then to my understanding, that would be reflected in the CPI for a whole year. But then after that, it would be net neutral. There would be no gain, because it's not like you put on a tariff and the price just keeps rising. It's a one-time price increase, right? So it's not, in my opinion, it's not actually inflation. And if anything, I think it would be disinflationary, because when you raise the price of something, now less people can afford to buy that thing. And then there would be less demand for that thing. It might actually be disinflationary, right? Like I heard there's a famous saying, and he said, I don't know who said it, but he said, the best cure for higher prices is higher prices. And I'll give you a really good example of this, all right? In 2022, February, the prices of townhomes and detached fell like $150,000 and condos was like $60,000, right? We didn't start cutting rates until like a month and a half after the prices were already falling. They had already fallen a lot and they were continuing to fall. They were going to fall whether or not we were hiking rates, right? And the reason being is we ran out of buyers who were willing to pay the higher prices. So the prices started to correct, right? It wasn't because we had higher rates that the prices corrected. The prices were falling regardless, right? Like the price had already come down like 15 to 20%, by the time we hiked rates 0.25 or 0.5 or whatever it was. So yeah, I don't know. I think the impact, I don't know if we should be making rate decisions on the impact of tariffs because it's not actually inflation. And if anything, it might actually be disinflationary. But again, no economist, Fraser Valley Realtor, you can make your own decisions. So this guy says, we continue to monitor the impact of retaliatory tariffs on consumer prices, particularly for autos and groceries. Early signs of price hikes were evident in April, and the pace of price increases for new passenger vehicles accelerated further in May, but grocery price inflation eased. Most experts were forecasting at least a few more rate cuts from the BOC in the coming months. However, that outlook may change quickly with recent developments. The Bank of Canada appears to have reached the end of its cutting cycle, with the policy rate now in the middle of the neutral range. While it has left the door open to further easing, that would likely depend on clearer signs of economic weakness alongside continued inflation. So this is my thought on this, right? Central banks are notorious for waiting until something explodes and then dropping the rates. So although we say the rate cutting cycle is done and we're not going to cut rates anymore, I'm not convinced because I think something bad is going to happen that's going to force them to play that card where they have to cut the rates. And I think anytime they're forced between a decision of economic collapse and inflation, they're just going to choose inflation every single time. I mean, look at where we are, right? It's inflation every single time. And, some people say, well, the interest rates need to be higher. They have to be higher. And again, I don't know if that's the case. You look at, let's just go to, this is the, historical inflation rate in Canada. And you look after 2008 when we started doing steroids, right? And the inflation rate was 1.78 in 2010. And you go through this whole decade when interest rates were basically below 3% and inflation was only above 2% twice. And this time is like just barely above 2%. And the other 80% of the time, with interest rates as low as they were, and they couldn't even hit their target of 2% inflation. And if we look at rates during this time period, 1%, 0.5% we were for 3 years, 1%. We went up to 1.75% before dropping them down during the pandemic. What are we at right now? We're at 2.75%, right? Well, obviously, we all know the CPI was higher than 0.9%, like they tell us in some of these years. But if this is the metric they are looking at to base rate policy decisions on, well, I would say that the rates don't need to be 4%. If we couldn't even get to 2% inflation with interest rates at 1% or the overnight lending rate at 1%, why does it need to be 2.75%? And my other thought process is like, does keeping the rates at roughly 4%, what they're at right now, does that actually have a big material effect on inflation? Because if the price of things that are going up, like groceries and gas and all these things, are people going to stop using those if interest rates are high? Are people going to stop eating? Are people going to stop driving? I mean, they might stop driving if they lose their job. But if people don't have jobs, then you can kiss inflation bye-bye pretty quickly. So, obviously core CPI is above 3% and, maybe it's a terrible idea to drop the rates right now. But I guess what I'm highlighting here is like, according to their metrics that they base their policy on, the economy was running just fine with interest rates at 1% and blah, blah, blah. And obviously it wasn't. Inflation was probably like 10 to 12%. But if this is the metric that you are basing the policy on, well, then I would say that the ideal interest rate that you need to be at is probably like 1% or maybe 1.5 or 1.25%. That's what this data would tell me. And to be honest, probably even lower because everybody has way more debt now, including the government. But I'm not suggesting they should cut rates to 1% right now or anything of that nature. I'm just highlighting that, hey, that's the way it was. And there's a lot of people that think the rates need to be high. I'm just suggesting maybe they don't. And I also think that, even though they state that, the rate cutting cycle is over, maybe I'm not convinced. I think something will happen that is going to cause them to drop the rates, just like what happens every other time we've been in this situation or the states have been in this situation. But if you think I'm stupid and wrong, you can let me know down in the comments. Otherwise, if you like the video, make sure you like the video, and I appreciate all of you who do. If you enjoy my videos, please subscribe to the channel. If you want to chat with me about buying or selling real estate in the Fraser Valley, there's a link down in the description. Otherwise, I'm that Agent Kelly. Appreciate you for watching. I'm making moves to move you. Peace.